everyone for joining in. Just please make sure that your lines are mute, and make sure that if you have any questions, you can raise it at the end of the session. So we're not gonna take any questions in the middle. Um, we're just gonna take the sessions at the end of the session. So please write down your questions, be ready, and at the end we're gonna let you know, and we are gonna dedicate the time for question and answers. I just want to brief you as well that the session is recorded. If you guys like to watch the recording for this session or any of our previous sessions, please feel free to visit our website. We have a page dedicated for the knowledge series, and you will be able to see all the recordings over there. So feel free, to join in and watch the recordings of the previous sessions. I just wanted, for the people who they have been just with us for the first time in this session, I want to introduce myself and the TCAE, or Toronto Compliance and AML Events. So I'm Susan Ismaili. I have been in financial crime and compliance for the past 14 years. I've been fighting against financial crime probably with so many of you alongside. Mostly I have been working in Middle East, and around a year ago I moved from Dubai to Canada. And almost 8 months ago I decided to create the group Toronto Compliance and AML Events. And within that, we had a lot of new initiatives. And one of the initiatives that we started with was that the knowledge series that you are all joined today. So as a part of the knowledge series, I've decided that since I really like and enjoy educating people and sharing the knowledge, I've decided that during this downtime, we can have some of the people who they have a lot of knowledge and experience joining us and share their experience and knowledge. And so many of you asked me the question that, okay, why you're not the speaker or you're not speaking. One of the reasons for that is that I'm always here. I can share my knowledge every time, but we have an amazing people for the past 11 weeks that I believe that their knowledge can be also shared. And this is a platform that I want everyone all around the world, to enjoy and see how much of information there is available and how much we can learn from each other to fight financial crime. So this is the background that we have, and the TCAE, the Toronto Compliance and AML Events, is basically a centralized place that I've created in order to have all the events, webinars, courses that are happening in Toronto, and it could be in a centralized place and it could be shared with everyone. We used to have a lot of face-to-face events before. However, right now we have been in a lockdown, so we have a lot of webinars going on. So this is how we're going to share, the information. So you can feel free to go to the website or download. We have an app as well, TCAE app, on your Apple Store. You could download it, and as well as the Android device, you can both download that. So yeah, so that's about me, TCAE and Knowledge Series. Today we are honored to have Mondiu with us. I've met Mondiu around a year ago in one of the events, and he's like one of my favorite persons. And he is a very humble person, and he has a wealth of knowledge. And I kind of encouraged him and pushed him to be with us today. Although that, I guess, it went to a lot of barrier from his comfort zone, but, I've encouraged him, to come and share the knowledge with all of you. And we decided to have this session and have this topic specifically because I know investigation is one of the hot topics, and there are very few webinars or educational institutions are talking about, okay, how is even a life of an investigator look like? So what we are gonna do, we're gonna take you behind the scene and have Mondiu talk about the investigation and share some great case studies. So where he's gonna walk you through some of the case studies that it has been done, and yeah, I'm sure that you're gonna enjoy. So with that, I'm gonna hand the floor to Mondu to explain more about himself and share with us a little bit of background about him, and yeah. Mm, and here you go, Mondu.
Hi guys, it's really good to have you, and thank you, Suzanne, for that brilliant introduction. I'm very happy to have you guys, and just a bit brief background about myself. I am an AML consultant with MMP. MMP is the largest indigenous professional services firm in Canada. I'm pretty sure if some of you haven't really worked in the Canadian market, you might not know who we are, but we are pretty big in the country. So what I do as an AML consultant is I help reporting entities. So pay attention to that term, reporting entities, so because I'll be using it throughout the presentation. So what a reporting entity means is someone, an entity that has to comply with the law. I'll talk briefly about the law as well. So what I help them with is on how to make sure that they have a compliance official in place that will take care of their AML program, their policies and procedures, their risk assessment, training, and how to conduct an audit of their program, their AML program. So these are regulatory expectations, and we work on the advisory side to help them fulfill that. Prior to that, I've worked with a few banks in the country and Nigeria and the UK as well. Okay, so this is a quick disclaimer just to let you know that if, especially for some of you that haven't worked in AML investigations before, you would it's really important for you to know that your organization's AML policies and procedures would always supersede any other piece of information that might be out there or what we are going to talk about in this presentation today. So take that as gospel. This is purely educational. It's just to give you guys a guide on what your day-to-day might look like as an AML investigator. Okay, in AML, we like our acronyms. So we are going to be using a few of these acronyms throughout the presentation. So you can see terms like FinTrack, RFI, KYC, EDD, UTRs, OSINT. Some of you might be very used to these terms. Just a heads up that I'll be using them a lot. I would give you a few seconds to look through them. STRs, suspicious transaction reports. In the US, it's called SAR, suspicious activity reports. And if you are used to different FIUs, financial intelligence units in other countries, you might hear about different names as well. Okay, so what is our agenda going to look like? We'll talk briefly about regulatory compliance, the why. Why are we going to be doing what we are going to be doing in a nutshell? So if you find yourself working as an investigator, it's always important to know the why. The investigative process as well, we'll be talking about that. Case studies, just to give us a brief intro of what a typical case would look like. That should be interesting. and I'll talk briefly about key skills. And those skills actually helped me do well when I was investigating as well. So, and question and answers, like Suzanne mentioned, would have the opportunity to ask a few questions after that. Okay, so the why, regulatory compliance. The reason you are going to be working as an AML investigator is you are going to be helping your employer comply with the law. It is that simple. So if you get a case and you have to make a decision on the case, it's because it's a regulatory requirement. So what is the law? For anyone who's joining from abroad, I think we have a few. This is going to focus on Canada, and the AML law in Canada is the PCML TFA, Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act. And the agency in charge of ensuring compliance with that law is the Financial Intelligence Unit in Canada, which is FINTRAC. And FINTRAC ensures that the Proceeds of Crime and Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing regulations are complied with, and they also have the power to audit reporting entities. So reporting entities go from banks to credit unions to money services businesses to accounting firms, and
Hello.
hi, and these entities have to comply with the PCML TFA, and FINTRAC issues guidelines to ensure that the provisions of the Act are easily complied with. And so what are the regulatory obligations? This is quite important, so I don't want to rush through it. So I'll just do a quick recap after this. So the regulatory obligations under the PCML TFA and PCML TFR, you have to, as a reporting entity, you have to have a compliance regime in place. And the compliance regime comprises of you have to appoint a compliance officer that would oversee your compliance regime. You would have heard about terms like CAMLO, compliance officer, chief anti-money laundering officer, MLRO. Different countries have different terms. So you need to have that in place. It's a regulatory requirement. You need to know your client or know your customer. You need to keep certain records, and you need to report to the FIU, which is the FINTRAC, when certain transactions take place. So that goes, so from the KYC requirement, it goes through the ongoing monitoring. So take, for instance, if you go to a bank and you open an account, regulatory requirement says they must identify who you are. They must know you. They ask you for your KYC documents, your utility bill to confirm your address and things like that. So that then flows through when you open your account. So when you open your account, it's a regulatory requirement that the bank has to know what's going on in the account. That's very, very important. So that's the periodic review of the business relationship, because you've established a relationship with the bank. So they have to review what's actually going on in your account. And the PCML TFA says you must monitor, detect, and report subsequent, you must report suspicious transactions to FINTRAC. So this is where you come in as an AML investigator to ensure that you help your employer to monitor transactions and report any transaction that might be suspicious. Okay, so in terms of suspicious transactions, so these terms are very, very important. So reasonable grounds to suspect. In Canada, according to FINTRAC, reasonable grounds to suspect is the threshold you need to report to FINTRAC if you believe that the transactions you're looking at is reportable or suspicious or indicative of money laundering or terrorist financing. And you don't need any monetary threshold. So what this means is, if you find that money laundering might be taking place, but the funds involved is very minute. We're talking about maybe 10 to 20 Canadian dollars. You might think, oh, this is nothing. It's concerning, but the, the, the funds involved do not look substantial. That is wrong. FINTRAC says you must report. So in some countries, they have different thresholds for suspicious activity. I know in the US, money services businesses have a threshold of, I think, 2,000 US dollars, and financial institutions have about 5,000 US dollars as the threshold. But then again, it depends on the level of risk. They can actually circumvent that and still file an SAR anyways. Attempted transactions, think of this as if you go to if a client goes to the bank and decides to complete a transaction, say you want to send a wire or a transfer to a friend or family or a third party, and you decide the last minute not to complete that transaction, and you just you say to the teller, you know what, I'm fine, I'll just go elsewhere, or I've changed my mind. If the activity is concerning or unusual, the teller might file what's called an unusual transaction report and go through the manager or go through the compliance officer, and they will file that report to the FIU or the transaction monitoring team. And that can lead to a suspicious transaction report, which is an STR. So the difference between an attempted and a completed transaction is you don't see movement of funds. So completed transaction, funds will move, and you would typically find out on a statement. But those two are still reportable to FINTRAC. So it's very important to note that. So if you start your day as an AML investigator, not typically you would go through training. Most financial institutions have 2 to 3 weeks training in place to make you feel comfortable with the system, the law, and so most of them are typically good. Most Canadian financial institutions, they make sure that you're ready to go on day one. But it's really important for you to know what to expect. So I find out that most AML investigators who do well, they would have done their due diligence before starting. So even the ones that didn't have a lot of experience, they will have gone through a lot of reading and things like that. So you typically have a team. You'll be assigned to a manager or a supervisor or a team lead. And your team lead on your day one in production, I call it production because you might have some sort of training going on. They would allocate a case to you. So you can either have a case, they might call it a case, or they might call it an alert. So they will assign that case to you, say C012345. That's your case number or your case ID. So that case then has to be worked. So you typically have your target, say you have to work 1 case a day or 2 cases a day. Then you'll be you would have access to multiple systems. So you would have your case management system, which would be your main system to adjudicate cases, to work cases. Then you have multiple systems to help you, risk and compliance tools, like your maybe systems to go look for more information, systems to go look for a particular transaction type. Different systems, you get access to them, and they will train you on how to navigate those systems. Then you have your feedback. So it's either you complete your case, you send it to your team lead because you have to go through maybe a glide path in productivity and quality. So they have to check that everything is fine, or you submit your case and close it without feedback. So if you have to file a disclosure, you file the disclosure, and quality assurance might come back to you later. So this just gives you a brief an overview of what it would look like at that particular level. So going into detail, I realize there's a lot of information here, so guys, bear with me. So the first thing you would have is your trigger event. So when you are conducting your investigation, this is the most important step is to understand the trigger event and to know what's actually going on. So under this trigger event, I have the auto, UTR, referrals, production orders. So a trigger can come from anywhere, multiple places. But the first one to note is the automatic trigger alert. So this would be a trigger based on your AML system, your automatic transaction monitoring software. So every single FI that has to comply with the law would have this system. So this system would have logic and thresholds fed in it based on transaction monitoring scenario. So what that means is, think about your day-to-day activity in a bank. If you go to a bank, you might go deposit cash. So if you need to conduct a particular say for instance, you need to pay fees and you have to deposit funds maybe multiple times in a month, an automatic alert might trigger based on that activity. So for instance, it could be multiple cash deposits within a month totaling $40,000. So you can see the logic, you can see the threshold, and you can see the variables involved. So that's it, that on a high level, so that's how a typical automatically generated alert works. So you would have to be able to understand the trigger. That's a very important step. So when you get a case, your responsibility is to know why this case, why this alert triggered in the first place. So if you can break that down, you are going to do very well when you make a decision on that case, because you know where to go, you know what you're doing. UTRs are, like I explained before, your typical report from the branch or from another service line they are mostly manual alerts. We tend to call them manual alerts. It will come from a teller saying, oh, this person came to the branch and we found them unusual. They did this. Someone was looking over their shoulder. And they tried to conduct this transaction. They said they wanted to send a fund to somebody they didn't know. So these are your typical kind of scenarios that you might get in a UTR. Referrals come from different service lines as well, maybe from a mortgage unit, and maybe they're concerned that money laundering might be taking place. Then production order. Production order is typically at the basic level. If a judge gives an authorized body a judicial authorization to look through your accounts or to look through your statements, so they can send that judicial authorization from the police to the bank to say, we need statements for Mr. ABC for 3 months or 3 years or 4 years, and the bank has to provide that information. So when that happens, we go through your records and we can actually trigger an investigation and review to see if there's anything suspicious. After that, your KYC, everything you hold on the customer, you have to review. You have to collect all the data you have on the customer. You'd have access. Remember when I talked about the systems, you would have access to all this information, the primary information, date of birth, name, occupation, country of residence, citizenship, everything you hold, because all this information will help you understand the customer. It is very key. KYC is the most important part of your decisioning process, because you have to know who you are looking at to understand their transaction, because the goal is to be able to marry the two, to be able to demonstrate that the activity you're looking at is in line with the customer profile. It would typically include internal notes, the accounts that the customer has with us, and any previous alerts. At times, you would have somebody that has been triggered before in the system. Then your review period. What is your review period? Is the period that you will be conducting, the scope of your review in terms of in terms of the period you'll be looking at. So you could have, so what I've said here is based on internal procedures. Multiple FIs have different procedures. Some will tell you 60 days before the trigger event. Some will tell you 30 days before the alert trigger date. So they have different rules for that. You don't have to worry about this. When you go through your internal training, they will tell you what your review period is. But your review period is what you have to stick to. You can't go outside it unless it's approved by your team lead or by your organization. And it's also relative. At times you could get a referral from enhanced due diligence team, and it's based on some adverse media on a customer, and they need you to then look back. A typical example is if a case involves maybe a conviction or an arrest of somebody who might be laundering proceeds of crime, and it took place in 2019 or 2017, you might have to go back to the client's records in 2017 to review the account to see if there's anything concerning taking place at the time. I'm going to move to review of accounts. So in the review of accounts, you can see that I've skipped quick scan. I would come back to that. So when you're reviewing your customers' accounts, the most important thing is to look at the trigger transaction itself. So the trigger transaction, remember when I talked about the trigger event at the start. So you go straight into that trigger transaction to be able to identify first, to say, okay, I know what this is about. A typical one is an alert trigger due to cash to check on the same day. So you take cash into the branch, you convert it to a check, or you send it to a third party on the same day. An alert might trigger. So when you are reviewing the account, you have to go to that particular day, that particular transaction, and follow the money. You should be able to say, you should be able to demonstrate, or should be able to analyze what actually happened to the funds, and to be able to talk about if the activity is concerning or unusual or not. So that would help you make a decision. And you can also look at related accounts as well. So related accounts would be maybe they have savings accounts, they have a business account, and depending on your policy, depending on the transaction type, depending on what you see when you're investigating your trigger transaction, you might have to go into those accounts to see what's actually going on, just at the basic level for now. And of course, you have to always follow the money. Then watch list screening. So I'll still talk about Google. Google is very important. It's one of the tools that you'll be using to screen your clients, just to know if there's any adverse media, any negative news connected to them, arrest, conviction, fraud, human trafficking, and things like that. Sanctions, every FI has to screen their clients to ensure that they are not trying to circumvent sanctions, or that they are not a sanctioned individual, or they are not connected to a sanctioned party. I put OFAC, OSFI. OFAC is mostly the US, but Canadian firms have to comply with that as well. And OSFI, which is strictly Canadian. PEPs as well, politically exposed person. I'm pretty sure most of you know what that means, but a politically exposed person they are typically considered as high risk. Not that they are bad, but it's because of the position they hold. It's someone who's been entrusted with a prominent position. They're mostly very influential. They influence decisions, and they control vast amounts of resources. So it's really important for you to identify them, and for enhanced due diligence to take you over from there. Let me go back here. Then your decisioning. So you either close the case, and depending on your level, you might not be able to close it because you think it's suspicious or it's concerning or unusual. You then have to escalate because you don't have filing priorities or filing privileges to a different level that would then file an SDR. But if you can, some FIUs have that kind of they have that kind of structure that you would go from trigger event to filing an SDR. If you have that, then all good. You just start your case and you file an STR if you believe an STR should be filed. But some, you just look at it and you will determine if it needs to be escalated or not. If it's not, then you close it. All good. I've put here Dow Jones, World Check, LexisNexis. These are the really common risk and compliance databases that you might be using. It depends on what your organization has. So these are mostly external, but your organization will buy licenses to use them. They are pretty important databases and they contain a lot of information and they use them to screen clients as well. This is typically what you find on Google. So at the basic level, you can see here on the top left corner, the Google search string is very common in AML circles. If you need to screen your client on Google, this is typically what your organization might ask you to use. And it's called the Boolean string. It's based on the Boolean logic. So you have the customer name and you have the and operators. It's really important to note that they are in caps, both and or. Then you have these keywords, the predicate offenses. You can see them: crime, money laundering, fraud. If you take that to Google and run, you can see we've used the name, a known criminal here, and it will trigger an alert. So it will trigger results for you, and you can then determine if your client is, if you have hits on this particular client. You can see, hi, you can see with El Chapo here, you can see that it's Mexican drug kingpin and things like that. So if your client's name is a potential match, you can discount it. So these are common discounting factors: the full name, date of birth, occupation. They would help you make a decision to know if it's the same person or not. And of course, I spoke about World Check as well. World Check is a massive database. It has a lot of government information. It will help you on terrorist financing, sanctions, to know if you're dealing with a terrorist or a politically exposed person, things like that. So that's very, very key. We are going to go into our first case study. I'm trying to keep note of the time. So our first case study, remember when I spoke about alerts? So this alert triggered as, it triggered automatically. And what's the reason? It's a large cash payment to a credit card account above monetary threshold. So the bank has the threshold. So I take this case and I'm wondering, okay, this is interesting. Who is my customer? Mr. Jacob Brown is male, was born in 1984. He lives in Richmond, Ontario, Canada. He's an accountant, he's married with 2 kids. He's been with the bank for 16 years. He holds a business account. So all this information will help me to sort of understand who this person is and why this person is conducting this kind of transaction. And I didn't have to make a call on the accounts that I have to review. So in this case, because credit card is involved, cash is involved, okay, we review the credit card accounts. We review the personal account, which would be the checking and savings, and we also review the business account. Again, it depends on your organization and what they instruct you to do, because in this case, you might have written policies and procedures to say, if you have this kind of trigger, this is what you should do. These are the accounts you should review. But in this case, this is what we're doing here. So we review the accounts, and we can find out, okay, it's mostly funded by payroll deposits from his employer. We can see bill payments. We can see, day-to-day expenses. Okay, all good, everything normal. Then we see cash deposits at 2 different branches in a town called Brighton, Ontario. And we start looking into the deposits. So we see day 1 on the 24th of April, there's 5,500 of cash deposits in a branch at 4 p.m. Then we look at day 2, we see he comes in and he deposits 6,000. What time? 4:30 p.m. at a different branch, the same city. Then we look at the following day and he issues a draft of 11,500 to himself at another financial institution. So how that works is you would ask the branch, if you ask the branch to issue you a draft, they'll move the funds in your account to an account that belongs to the bank, and they would issue a draft in your name because you are saying issue it to me at another financial institution. So this is what this guy did. So we check his credit card account to see cash repayments below the reporting threshold. What is the reporting threshold when it comes to cash? In Canada, if you deposit cash of 10,000 or more, the reporting entity, which is the bank here, has to file what is called a large cash transaction report to FINTRAC, the FIU for Canada. And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It's just a regulatory requirement. In the US, they have that as well. It's called CTR. Different countries have their own ways of monitoring cash that way. And but in this case, the cash repayments were below the threshold. You can see they were large round dollar amounts, 8,500, 7,000. And we also saw that his credit card balance was way below what he was paying back. So in this case, he had 700 balance at a time. And we also found out that he was taking cash advances at the casinos as well, large cash withdrawals. If you take funds using your credit card, if you take cash using your credit card at the ATM, it will be considered cash advance. So we look at his business account as well, and we see check deposits from multiple parties. We couldn't really connect them, different entities, different individuals. And most of those checks were from numbered companies. In Canada, we have, you can open an account, so you can open a company and it would be numbered, and you wouldn't have to have a name for it, have a trading name for it. So it could be maybe, for instance, 10123445 Ontario Incorporated. So that's a numbered company, and you might not have a lot of information on this kind of company. So you have no website or relevant information on this company. You couldn't find any checks drawn on the business to pay maybe bills or to pay rent or salaries, nothing like that. And we look at the business purpose, the purpose of this business. Well, okay, what does this business do? It says general merchandise, doesn't tell us much. So what happened to the funds in this account? Remember, if you want to conduct an AML investigation at the basic level, you want to know what's funding the account and how are the funds being used. Money in, money out at the very basic level. It goes from very simple to complex, of course, but we are just looking at this at the basic level. It would help you make very rational decisions. And in this case, the funds were depleted within 3 days. Okay, so the next thing we do when after all this, we go to Google and open source intelligence, WorldCheck, LexisNexis, whatever tool you have in your system, in your organization. So we couldn't find any hits on Mr. Brown, no hits on the numbered companies as well. Remember I talked about internal notes. Most FIs have internal notes that it's like a database, internal database that every line of business has access to in your record as a customer. They can put in notes about your interaction with the bank, about when you visited, what you've said, things like that. So it gives us a lot of information about you in some cases. But we couldn't find any concerning information about Mr. Brown. But we were able to note that he actually works in downtown Ontario, but there were no previous alerts raised, no UTRs raised on him. We also couldn't find any evidence of casino winnings or him gambling, having a gambling history. Okay, in this case, what do you guys think? Are we going to file an STR to FINTRAC or not?
Yeah, I think we should file the STR of this game.
Yeah, we are having a polling question on the screen, so you can vote. Should we file an STR, yes or no? I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to collate your answers. Okay, coming right up. Okay, here we go. Let's see the result. Okay, 93% are pro STR. That's great.
Great.
So, yeah.
93%, yeah. So I think we are pretty much on the same track. So I'm just gonna quickly run through the red flags. Guys, don't forget, it's really important to note that AML can be AML investigations can be very, very subjective because most of the information you would have is what you have in front of you, or if you can get more information on the internet, adverse media, open source. So it can be very subjective. So you can make an argument about, based on facts, logic, indicators, and someone else might disagree with you, and they might come up with a more superior argument or an argument that's backed up with more facts. So most of the time, there's really no right or wrong answer but it's just based on logic, facts, indicators, and how you're able to articulate your response. So in this case, we were not able to ascertain the source of funds for the cash, the check deposit, so we were blind there. It's a red flag. And the relationship between the client and those guys sending funds to him and the entities, none, we didn't know. Did you guys notice that the Mr. Brown attempted to structure the cash deposits into his personal accounts? So if I quickly go back, here you can see day one, 5,000, day two, sorry, 5,005, day two, 6,000. Then day three, all the funds go out as draft to a different financial institution. When you have to file a large cash transaction report to FinTrack, there's something called a 24-hour rule. So if you deposit cash totaling 10,000 or more within 24 hours, so even if you break it down into multiple transactions, if they total up to 10,000 or more, a large cash transaction report has to be filed to FinTrack. But in this case, you can see it goes out of the 24-hour zone by about 30 minutes. So it looks like it's deliberately tried to circumvent that threshold or that reporting obligation. So 11,005, we haven't filed an LCTR to FinTrack, and a copy goes to the Canadian Revenue Agency as well, the CRA, equivalent of the IRS in the US. So he's been able to sort of game the system there. And we could also see rapid movement of funds is a red flag. Overpayment on his credit card, that's a red flag. We couldn't find any known gambling history. So has he won before at the casino? We couldn't ascertain that. And the final disposition of funds, we couldn't ascertain it either. And the numbered companies, we couldn't get any information on the numbered companies. Are they shell companies? We don't know. So many red flags in this case. And even in his business, what is he doing in his business account? It says general merchandise. So what's the activity in that we found? Do they make sense? No. Well, so many concerning activity. And also, if you look at this guy, is an accountant, he's married with 2 kids, his business, we don't really know much about his business. Do you think the activity is in line with the customer profile, or the customer profile fits this activity? No. And also, you can see this map that I've put here. He's conducting transactions in Brighton, Ontario. Brighton, Ontario is about 1 hour, 32 minutes from Richmond Hill, where he lives. And it's even farther from where he works in Toronto, because Toronto is east of Brighton. So you start asking that question, what's his connection with Brighton? Why is he, if you don't have that information, if you don't know his connection, it's a potential red flag. So just to sort of give you a lot of indicators as to how you can come up with an argument to then say, this is potentially reportable, or it's potentially suspicious and reportable to FinTrack. You can file an STR on this. and I don't think there will be problems at all. You can also recommend the market for the clients. I'm just going to quickly move on to the next case because of time. So we have this man called Mr. Cromwell, Mike Cromwell. And so what is the reason for the alert? There's multiple incoming wire transfers in his personal account above the monthly threshold. Okay, so how many accounts are we looking at? We're looking at his personal and his business account because he has a business account. He's Canadian, he was born in 1954, he's been with the bank for a long time, he resides in British Columbia, he's married with 3 kids, he's a retired software engineer, and he owns a business account. What do we find in his checking and savings account? Okay, so we see a lot of wires coming in, and in Canada, a wire is called an electronic fund transfer. And if it goes above 10,000 or more, if it goes above 10,000 or if it's 10,000 or more, you have to file what's called an EFTR. So think about the cash equivalent, which is the LCTR. So an electronic fund transfer report has to go to FinTrack if you send a wire of 10,000 or more, if you receive a wire of 10,000 or more. So in this case, we could see that if his account was funded by multiple wires from people we couldn't confirm his relationship with, and entities as well, but we could see payroll deposits, we could see day-to-day expenses. So you see the normal, then you see the unusual. Again, remember what I said about going to the trigger itself to see what's actually going on. So when we go to the trigger, we saw the wires, but then what happened to the wires? They were all transferred to the business account within a month. So we go to the business account and we see similar activity going on. There's wires coming in, wires going out. And we notice that the amounts are below 10,000, 7,005, 9,005. And we also found out that the incoming wires were used to purchase property. Checks were issued to a law firm, and it looked like it was purchasing property based on the memo on the check. It says property purchase, so we would assume that it's buying property. And we also found 2 wires to a company called STC Consult in Barbados. Okay, so what is going on here? So we go on Google and Adverse Media and World Check to screen this guy. We didn't find anything on him, on the entities or third parties, but on STC Consult, we're able to find that it's incorporated in Guernsey in the UK, but there's no website for STC Consult. So we go to internal notes. There's multiple alerts generated on this guy. There's UTRs as well. And we've sent what's called an RFI, a request for information. So you, as an AML investigator, if you are stuck, you can't, so you're looking at an activity, you don't know if you need to file an SCR or if you think it's fine, you don't have enough information, you can send an RFI to the branch where the customer holds an account and go straight to them to say, I need you to contact the client and ask all these questions. So you can come up with your questions without tipping them off. So an RFI can be very helpful. So we've sent one in the past, no response, and they actually decisioned the case. So we also found out that the client uses his safety deposit box a lot. Most times before speaking to the teller, most times, immediately after speaking to the teller, and he's known to always say to the tellers that he doesn't like depositing cash above 10,000. So he's known for that. What do you guys think? Are we filing an STR or not?
Yeah, let's see. Okay, you're gonna have a polling question coming up on your screen. Should we file an STR? Yes or no? You have 30 seconds. So there is a lot of questions coming up, on the chat box, and
Wow.
there is a lot of discussions happening at the same time.
Okay, okay.
But we are gonna keep the questions at the end, and as well as that, we might go a bit over of 11 because we want to make sure that you guys get all the information as possible, you know, from Mondiu. So, so you need to bear with us. Okay, so here are the results. 94%, yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Great. So, what are the red flags? We don't know the source of the wires. We don't know the purpose of the wires. We don't know the relationship between the client and the senders of the wires. The activity is not in line with what we know about this customer. We can see that there's the funds, the wire transfers were below the reporting threshold. And remember I mentioned Barbados, I also mentioned Guernsey. So those two jurisdictions are considered high risk in some places. I know the Financial Action Task Force considers Barbados to be a high risk jurisdiction for now. And they are known tax havens, and that in itself could be a red flag. And I also mentioned that he bought 5 properties in 2 months. That's a bit excessive. You can question that. And because it could be straw buying. What is straw buying? When somebody purchases property or assets on behalf of someone else, why would they do that? They could be doing that because they don't want to reveal the identity of the person you're buying it for, so the ultimate beneficial owner of the property. So it's very common in AML, and you mostly find that in real estate. It's a big, big red flag. But again, remember, most of these things you might not be able to prove. You might not have documentary evidence that this is what's going on. Remember when I said reasonable grounds to suspect? That is your required threshold. So if you can come up with all these arguments and based on the facts, based on the indicators, you can still file an STR to FINTRAC. And he is known to always say to tell us that, I don't like going above 10,000. That's a concern in itself. And he uses a safety deposit box a lot, excessively. The problem with that, for those of you who have had safety deposit boxes in the past or currently have one, the problem with that is, as a financial institution, you are blind when it comes to safety deposit boxes. You don't know what's going on there because a client, you don't have the right to know what the client holds in the safety deposit box. So you're blind, and your automatic transaction monitoring system that you've put in place to monitor transactions cannot pick up unusual activity in the safety deposit box. And if you find someone using it a lot, they should be using the tellers, they should be using the bank. Why are they using the safety deposit box to conduct activity excessively? So that in itself is a red flag. So on this case, we're filing an STR, and you can recommend a demarket. So recommending a demarket, really, what it means is you look at the level of risk, you look at the activity. You could say, do we really want to keep this client? You can speak to your team lead and say, this activity is too risky. They might do it again. Then depending on the risk appetite of your organization, they might say, you know what, let's get rid of this person. We don't want them doing this with us. Okay, so we'll move on to the next. This is the last case study, so we're going to breeze through this quite quickly. Miss Maya, so the trigger for this one is cash. So we found multiple cash deposits above a 3-month threshold. So we look at 3 months, and there's suddenly a spike in 1 month, and we're thinking this is quite unusual. What is going on? She was born in 1999. She lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. She's a customer service rep. She earns 30,000 per annum. She's single, no dependents, and she recently joined the bank. Okay, so we look at 2 accounts that she holds with the bank, and we see that it's funded by payroll deposits, all normal. We see day-to-day expenses, all normal. These are things you will find when you're looking at a typical case and you are going through statements, you would expect to find all this normal activity, but don't forget trigger event, cash, date, utilization. So you're going straight into the cash. You can see that there's two lump sum deposits in the month of May, 14,000 and 16,000. And she takes half of the money and transfers it into another account. And that account belongs to someone else, but it's within the bank. So you have access to to that account. So you can go straight into it. And other activity consistent with expectations. So we don't have any problems besides the cash and the utilization. So we go into that account. We see it belongs to Mr. Andrew Johnson, is male, 34 years old, also resides in Halifax. He's a graphic designer, works at a marketing firm, and he receives payroll from his employer, all good, all normal. And what did he do with the money? He issues a draft to a law firm called ABC LLP. Remember, always follow the money. So this is you following the money and being able to see the utilization. So we look at adverse media. We couldn't find anything on them, Andrew and Maya, no sanctions hits, no issues. But then we were able to see that the law firm is operating out of downtown Halifax. Both the law firm, Maya and Andrew, all live in Halifax. So all good. So we also checked the internal notes and we're able to see, don't forget when I said, if you deposit cash in Canada, 10,000 or more, a large cash transaction report would have to be filed to FinTrack. So we were able to see this on file. So when we went to the LCTR, we found that, and when you file a large cash transaction report, the bank will ask you for the source of the funds. Where'd you get this money from? And Maya told us gift. And that was it. So that was what we found. So as an AML investigator, you can access that report and see. So that's what you found as an AML investigator. So it's just gift. We didn't find any concerning information on both of them, no prior alert for both of them. And a request for information was sent by the AML investigator. That sort of makes sense because you don't have a lot of information. It says gift, but gift doesn't really explain a lot to you, doesn't really satisfy your any sort of concerns you have. So you can ask for a source of the funds. You can ask for the relationship between Andrew and Maya. You can ask for what they use the funds for, why they send this draft to this law firm. So you can ask all these questions. And typically, when you do your first RFI, it will go through your team lead or your manager. They will screen it for you. They will help you make sure that it's compliant, that you're not asking relevant questions. But it's good to know that this is sort of what you should expect. And in this case, we sent an RFI and it came back. Maya responded. She told us that the cash deposits were a gift from a wedding, and she got married to Andrew in April, and the funds were split between them. And the draft was for a down payment on a property, the one that went to ABC LLP. What do you guys think?
Cool. Let's see how's the poll say. So let's vote. Should we file an SDR or no? Let's have 20 seconds to get all the answers in. Okay, here we go. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we have about 32% saying yes, filing STR, 68% saying no.
Okay, so let's see who is right. Which side?
Okay, so we were able to use the information that that Maya sent back to us. So the RFI, we're able to go to Google to try to see if you can get more information. So Maya has told us that she got married to Andrew and they reside in Halifax. We can try to see if we can get more. So we pop in Maya Jones and Andrew Johnson wedding registry. And these are things you pick up based on your experience. And the more you try to get more information, you see that there are lots of skills you can use or lots of techniques you can use to get more information on your case. So in this case, we're able to find a wedding registry for Maya and Johnson, and Andrew, and we were able to corroborate the information to confirm that it's actually them. And we were also able to see a lot of messages publicly available on the internet from friends and family, wishing them well, things like that. So we were able to sort of make sense of what Maya said in the request for information. And remember, ABC LLP, a law firm, is operating in Nova Scotia as well, Halifax. So we were able to make sense of it and sort of do some basic verification, and we didn't see any contradictions. And the findings, open source information was in line with the customer testimony, very important, no contradiction. So we weren't able to prove that she wasn't telling the truth. We found the wedding registry, like I said. You might not find this. This is just, every single case you work is going to be on a case-by-case basis. You can't assume that one size fits all. It's very, very important. Every single case will always be different. The check to ABC LLP was for a down payment on a real estate property. It makes sense because when we go to the website of ABC LLP, we're able to see that they specialize in real estate. So that also makes sense. Then the spike in the cash deposit, remember the trigger, because there was a spike in the 3 months average, it was below, it was above a particular threshold, and it was in line with the wedding timeline. So she got married in April and she's depositing cash in May, and she's saying it's gift. It makes sense, it's reasonable in some sort. And remember, she deposited 14,000 and 16,000 different times in May, and she didn't attempt to structure those funds. She didn't attempt to do 5,000 and 6,000 or 5,000 or 7,000 just to go below the threshold. She didn't attempt to do that. So we filed LCTRs, and so we were able to make sense of the transaction, and we just updated the KYC. So I've put CDD here, customer due diligence at the basic level, no STRs filed. Okay. Key skills, guys. I think this is the last slide, and we should be ready to finish up. So based on my experience and what I've seen, looking at cases, reviewing STRs, the things that are really important for you, the skills that are really important for you to do well in AML investigations: attention to detail. Every single information you put down is relevant. Remember, it's a regulated environment. It's heavily regulated, and it goes beyond just looking at transactions and looking for money laundering. There's terrorist financing as well. So this is very, very serious. You could pick up activity that relates to potential terrorist financing, and it could be maybe 2 to 3 transactions. So you should be able to, you should have a keen eye to really know what's going on. And the information you put down is really important. 1 0 or 2 zeros can make a difference in the decision you make. You should be able to critically, analyze issues and scenarios. You should be able to think critically and be able to analyze it as well. And it's good to have knowledge of AML laws. It's very important in any country that you're operating in. And at times, if you don't have a legal background, you could find it overwhelming. Okay, it's really difficult to understand all these legal terms. Try and look for regulations. Regulations sort of simplify what to do. And the law is most of the time in depth, but the regulations are trying to make sure that they are just guidelines for you, just based on the law. And the BSA in the US is very good as well. The Bank Secrecy Act, that's the AML regulation in the country. Then the OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset and Control, is the sanctions regulation for the US. So these are pretty common ones. If you can sort of have some basic knowledge of them, it will be really good, and you can put them on your resume. And of course, communication skills, very, very important. Your ability to articulate your points. Remember, you'll be arguing for or against an STR. It's really important for you to be able to write in clear and concise manner, and it would really, really help you. and you'll be using a lot of systems. You'll be exposed to, you know, multiple systems. And if you're tech savvy, you don't have to be an IT guru. Don't get me wrong, but if you're tech savvy, it would really help you. So try and, you know, Excel is a fantastic software to, because some FIs, when you download transactions, you go straight to Excel. And if you can, you know, get used to using pivot tables, it would help you, VLOOKUPs and things like that. You should be able to research as well. Remember, open source, there's a lot of information out there. Your skill, your ability to put one and two together and find more information is crucial, because remember, without the information, besides the information you have within the banking software itself, you're almost blind. So we put a lot of emphasis on additional information you're able to find. Remember, you'll be working like a detector, sorry, like a detective. So you're trying to look for more information and to sort of corroborate what you have. Um, Time management, very crucial. You have to be very diligent, because in an AML environment, there has to be a target. So maybe if you're working cases, your target might be 1 case a day or 2 cases a day. If you're working alerts and it will probably take you 30 to 45 minutes, your target might be maybe 15 or 10 a day. So you should be able to hit target and still maintain quality standards. Try and keep up to date with trends. What I use is Google. I put like um, I put key terms in my Google alerts, and it will give me a lot of information like FinTrack, AML, money laundering, fraud, FATF, CAMS, you know, things like that. It helps me stay up to date. And I share the articles I get on LinkedIn a lot. Resources, FinTrack has a lot of resources. Visit their website. FATF has a lot of resources as well, and ACAMS, lots of interesting articles on AML investigations. The key certification here, CAMS and ACFCS, they're sort of the go-to ones if you really want to certify. It's good to be certified, and it's becoming really competitive. You don't want a potential employer to not employ you because you're not certified. So if you can get CAMS or ACFCS, it's good. I am CAMS certified, and I might do CFCS in the future. It's always good. You gain more knowledge and more sort of prestige in the industry. Question and answer. Suzanne, back to you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Mondiu. It was really, really great. I have been seeing a lot of comments saying that, well prepared presentation and the flow, and, capturing all this step by step things that, you need to look into as an investigator. So really, really appreciate it, Mondiu. Cool. So we're gonna have a few minutes for the Q&A. I'm gonna just pick and choose a couple that I see coming up. There's an interesting one which I think it would be a good one, to raise. In case a supporting document was requested, the client refuses to provide us with the document, arguing it is personal matter. I know it gives us more reason to suspect the transaction, but what are the procedures to follow in order to escalate the matter on the AML side of the situation?
Okay, so it depends. It depends on, remember when I said it's very, very subjective. So it depends on your organization's risk appetite. So if they determine based on the information and the supporting information you have and the context of the transactions, if they determine that the risk is too high, they will likely file an SDR. But if they don't think the risk is too high, they might decide not to. But if a customer is refusing to provide information to enable us make a decision on a case, that in itself is a red flag. It's not a good look, because it is a regulatory requirement to monitor transactions, to know exactly what the client is doing. So the risk is high, reputational risk and regulatory risk. legal risk on the bank side, because if anything goes wrong, for instance, what if this client is a potential terrorist? If the regulators come in and maybe if law enforcement ask for that information, you have to provide it. And if you don't have it, or if it triggers a big investigation, then it becomes a problem because they would ask you if you've done your due diligence. I'm sure you guys have heard about a lot of all these FIs that get fined by the US, by regulators across the world. You find similar failings in terms of not doing their due diligence. Maybe if you ask questions and the customer refuses to answer, you might think, you know what, it's fine. Let's just let this go. At times it could come back to you and it would bite you really hard as an entity.
Awesome. Yeah. Just to add to that, being in Middle East, I think I have faced a lot of this kind of situation, especially if you're dealing with royal families. So royal families, usually they want to take the information, personal, and they don't want to share to the financial institutions. So it usually boils down into how the senior management as well want to deal with this and take the risk, as you said, Mondu, the risk appetite of the organization, and as well as some of them that we had to reject because they were like very few information, but there were some that they collaborated and shared adequate information to at least satisfy the regulatory obligations.
Yeah.
Cool. One question for you, Mondu, is that I had received a lot of questions about AML investigation role, and is it a good career path, to have for future? And this is like a kind of a hot subject, and everyone is asking, okay, should we go into AML investigation, or should we look into other sort of other parts of AML, because there are a lot of investigator, right now in the market. Can we have a secure job? What are your insight on that?
Um, I, I'm a fan of AML investigations. I would always say yes. So AML investigations, it drives a lot of traffic. You always find a lot of people in that field, transaction monitoring to be precise, and it is a good career path to be on because it's bigger than just AML investigations. It's way bigger than that. You have sanctions due diligence, which is a career in itself. You can build a career on just sanctions. You can be a sanctions expert. And that's not even transaction monitoring. Transaction monitoring in itself, you can do a lot in transaction monitoring. You can grow within the ranks. You can go to quality assurance. You can go to major investigations. You can go to enhanced due diligence. There's KYC, client onboarding. You can go to capital markets. So there's a lot you can do even within AML transaction, AML compliance in itself. And also, you can also find yourself getting opportunities within law enforcement. You can, because if you have a lot of AML investigations experience, the opportunities in law enforcement to sort of help with money laundering reports or money laundering expert reports. So these are things that people don't really think about because they always look at the basic, the sort of entry level where everyone is really flocked in. But there's loads of other opportunities that would come up once you become very, very comfortable within the industry. I work as a consultant and I started off as an AML investigator. And when you consult, you typically just do governance and audit and you help solve problems in AML. That's another field in itself, and there's a lot you can do in that field. And if you connect with a lot of people within the industry that are at the senior level, you see that most of them, they spend most of their time in AML. Some of them have worked with the regulator, and some of them, working with consulting firms, and they've done really, really well. But most of the time when we get that question, people always focus on just AML investigations at that level, and it goes way beyond that. So it's, if you're really interested, you have to be interested in it though. If you're really interested in it, it's a good career path to be on. Your mic is on mute, Suzanne.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Yes.
Great. Yeah, I guess, being a consultant as well, it will, you have to have as a broad knowledge as, as you could, in AML, and you have to be able to manage all the questions that are coming from the client. Awesome. I think I will have just the last question for you, which is, with respect to COVID-19, do you think that, what are the suspicious trends that you see in the field?
Okay, so with COVID-19, the first thing you think about is, how will customer behavior change? So when you think about that, you then start thinking about the possibilities of um, trigger events and suspicious activity. The first thing that comes to my mind is online non-face-to-face transactions. So personal interactions, face-to-face transactions will likely reduce. So you have more activity online. In Canada, we have what's called EMTs, email money transfers. So if you want to do personal transfers to friends and family or to entities, you can send it via EMT, and it's all online. So I'm expecting more activity I'm expecting EMTs to go up. So if you see cases of smurfing, many to one, one to many, it could increase. Human trafficking, human smuggling, you could see payments online via EMTs. And you could also see an increase in predicate offenses like drug trafficking, because we're looking at potential economic hardship. So in countries where maybe drug trafficking is rampant, that might increase and flow through to other predicate offenses like kidnapping and any other predicate offense you can think of, and it would be due to COVID-19. And financial institutions will have to be on their toes, because they would then have to look at their existing AML rules and scenarios and tweak them to fit the sort of trends that they are seeing. So that's very, very crucial, because if you think that a threshold for an email money transfer is, say, what you would consider to be unusual is 10,000 in 2 months or 10,000 in a month, you might have to tweak that to increase it or reduce it based on what COVID-19 is causing customers to do. So there's a lot to think about, but the most important thing is the non-face-to-face part of it. It's going to drive a lot of potentially suspicious activity, even fraud as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
totally agree. Okay, so let's wrap up. Thank you so much, Mondiu. Thanks a lot.
Suzanne, hi. I have one direct question for Mondiu, if you don't mind. Can I ask it?
Yes, go ahead. We actually,
Okay.
I would recommend you, to contact him personally, because we are out of our time. We're above our time, actually, and he has his contacts now on the screen. So I think it would be a good idea, to reach him if you have any more questions.
Yeah, you can contact me on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Mondiu, I've already sent a request on LinkedIn.
Okay.
My name is Nitin. I'm also working in this.
Yeah, I guess we lost you, Nathan. Okay. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. We just want to just share with you an information about the certificates everyone was asking me. And at the end of the session, today, by end of today, you're gonna receive an email from us, and you can basically just answer the questions, and if you get the answers correctly, you will pass and we can offer you the certificate. And one more thing, please make sure that you not go ahead with the exam at the same time, because last time everyone went at the same time to the system. So you have 5 days to complete the test. So feel free, don't worry about it, just take your time and go to the exam at the same. Just the last thing that I wanted to do before we leave, want to celebrate Mondiu's birthday with a little candle we have here. And everyone has already sent you a lot of wishes on the chat box, and they have already celebrated you, and we wanted to do a big celebration and thank you for being with us. So
Thank you very much, guys.